You will marry the girl, or you will bury your honor beside her brother. The words came from Colvin's own solicitor, a small grey man who had never in 11 years dared raise his eyes above the Duke's cravat, and who now stood white-lipped in the cold library of Kesthaven House as though the paper trembling in his hand might catch fire. Colvin, Duke of Kesthaven, did not move from the window. He watched the rain lay itself in long grey ropes against the glass, and thought that a man could be undone by a sheet of ink as surely as by a pistol at 10 paces. "Read it again," he said, the exact wording. The solicitor swallowed. "I, Everett Grail, being of sound mind and failing body, do commend to the honour of Colvin, Duke of Kesthaven, the only thing of worth I leave behind, my sister Delphina, who has kept this house and kept me, and whom I could not keep myself. He swore once, on the field at Aldermore, that he would spend his life in my debt. I call the debt now. Let him see her safe, or let his word be worth nothing." The little man lowered the page. "It is witnessed, your grace, signed the night before he died. There can be no question of forgery." There could be no question of anything, Colvin thought. That was the horror of it. He had knelt in the mud at Aldermore with Everett Grail's blood soaking warm through his glove, and he had made that vow the way drowning men make vows, believing he would never be asked to keep it. Everett had laughed then, even gut-shot and grey. The man had found the breath to laugh and said, "Mind you don't forget, Colvin. I shall hold you to it in the next world if I must." 10 years the words had slept. 10 years, and the man had reached up out of his deathbed to close his fingers around Colvin's throat. He had no other provision for her. Colvin asked, "Known, your grace. The estate at Maron was mortgaged twice over. The creditors are already at the gate. When they are satisfied there will be nothing, not a coin, not a roof. Miss Grail will be turned onto the road within the fortnight unless a settlement is made." The solicitor hesitated, then added, more quietly, "There is a cousin who has offered to take her, a Mr. Hollis Thackeray of Bath." Colvin turned from the window at last. "You say that as though it were a mercy." "I say it, your grace, because you should know the alternative before you refuse. Mr. Thackeray would take her as a companion to his wife, which is to say as an unpaid servant, to be reminded daily of her charity." "I have met the gentleman." The solicitor's mouth thinned. "I would not send a dog to that house." The Duke said nothing for a long moment. He was a man that other men had learned not to press in silence. His silences were famous and feared, and it was said in the clubs of St. James that the Duke of Kesthaven had not smiled since his wedding day 9 years past, a wedding that had ended 11 months later in a churchyard and a small stone, and a rumour, never spoken to his face, that he had frozen the first Duchess to death by degrees with the cold of his own nature, that the girl had died of a fever after a hard winter, and a harder confinement was a truth too plain for the drawing rooms. They preferred the legend. Colvin had let them keep it. A man armoured in a legend need not be touched by anyone. "Where is she now?" he asked. "At Maron, your grace. Alone, but for an old cook who will not leave her, though she has not been paid since Michaelmas." Colvin crossed to the desk. He had expected, when the solicitor was announced, a matter of tenants or timber. He had not expected to be handed a dead man's daughter, a dead man's sister, like a debt of honour with a face he had never seen. He tried to summon that face and could not. He had known Everett Grail in the regiment as one knows a brother, but the sister had been a shadow behind the man's letters. "Delphina keeps house for me now that mother is gone. Delphina says I am a fool and she is right. Delphina sends her regards." Which is to say, she has donned my coat again and pretends she is not a drudge, a plain, dutiful, dwindling creature who had given her youth to nursing a spendthrift brother and had nothing now to show for it, but a mortgaged roof and a cousin who kept dogs better than kin. "I will go to Maron myself," Colvin heard himself say. The solicitor's head came up sharply. "Your grace, you need not. A letter would suffice. A settlement can be arranged through—" "I made the vow to his face," Colvin said. "I will not discharge it through a clerk." He reached for his gloves. "Have the carriage brought round." It was a full day's drive to Maron, and the estate, when the wheels at last ground onto its weed-choked drive, was worse than the solicitor's account. The gates hung open and rusted. Ivy had got into the stonework and pulled it apart, patient as grief. 2 of the upper windows were boarded, and the fountain in the forecourt stood dry and cracked, a stone nymph pouring nothing into nothing while the rooks jeered from the eaves. Colvin stepped down into the wet dusk and felt absurdly that he had come to the wrong place, that no living person could keep a heart alight in such a ruin. Then the door opened, and Delphina Grail came out to meet the Duke who had come to buy her. She was not what he had built in the carriage. She was young, younger than her brother's letters had let him believe, 24 perhaps, and though her gown was 3 seasons out of the mode and mended at the cuff with stitches so small they were nearly a boast, she wore it as though it were of no consequence whatever, which somehow made it of none. Her hair was dark and plainly dressed. Her face was not the sort the drawing rooms called beauty. It was too grave for that, too still, with a wide clear brow and a mouth held firm against whatever she was feeling. But her eyes, when they found him across the ruined court, did not drop and did not flutter and did not plead. They took his measure the way he was accustomed to taking the measure of other men, and he thought with a start he did not show. They were not much impressed. "Your Grace," she curtsied correctly, no more deeply than courtesy required. "You have come a long way. I did not think a letter would bring you in person." "You knew I was coming?" "Mr. Pardew wrote that you might." "He is a kind man and a poor liar. He tried to make it sound like a small thing, which is how I knew it was not." A gust drove the rain sideways across the court, and she did not so much as flinch from it. "You had better come in. The east rooms are dry." "I cannot promise more than that, and I will not pretend I can." He followed her into a hall stripped near to the walls. The good pictures were gone, sold, he understood, the pale rectangles on the panelling where they had hung standing like gravestones of their own. A single lamp burned. An old woman in an apron peered from a doorway, saw the Duke's height and his black travelling cloak, and crossed herself before withdrawing. Delphina led him to a small parlour where a mean fire struggled in the grate, and she did not apologize for the meanness of it, and he found he respected her for that more than he could have said. She poured him nothing, for there was nothing to pour, and she did not pretend to hunt for it. Instead she stood and let the silence sit, and Colvin, who had crossed 3 counties in the expectation of managing a frightened girl, found himself the one waiting to be granted leave to speak. It was a small thing. It unsettled him more than it should have. "You know why I have come," Colvin said. "I know what my brothers will require of you." She stood by the fire, her hands folded, her chin level. "I have read it. Mr. Pardew was good enough to send me a copy that I should not learn my fate from a stranger's mouth. I know that Everett—" Her voice caught once on the name, and she mastered it. "That my brother, God keep him, has made a gift of me to a man I have never met, as though I were a horse in his stable he wished to see well stalled. I know that you did not ask for this and do not want it, and have every right to be as angry as I am." Colvin had come prepared to be gracious to a grateful woman, or patient with a weeping one. He had not come prepared for anger, and hers went through the polished surface of him like a stone through ice. "You are angry," he said. "Should I not be?" For the first time something flared behind the stillness. "I loved my brother. I nursed him through the fever that took mother, and through 3 ruinous winters, and through every folly of his purse, and I would do it all again, and I do not repent 1 hour of it. But he had no right to dispose of me. Not to you, not to my cousin Thackeray, not to any man living. I am not a debt to be paid, Your Grace. I am the one who has been paying all along and quietly, and I am tired of being spent." She stopped. Colour had come up in her face. She seemed to hear herself, and the danger of it. "There. Now you may go home and tell your clerk that Miss Grail is an ungrateful shrew, and that your honour is discharged, and that no reasonable man could be held to a vow made to save such a creature from herself." "Is that what you wish me to do?" The question checked her. She had armed herself against pity, he saw, and against duty, and against the cold grandeur she must have expected of him. She had not armed herself against being asked plainly what she wanted, because he doubted anyone had asked her that in the whole of her life. "What I wish," she said slowly, "has not signified in a very long time, Your Grace. I have learned not to spend much thought on it. Spend it now." He set his gloves on the mantel and faced her fully, and the fire threw his shadow long across the stripped room. "I did not drive a day into the rain to bully a frightened woman into a chapel. If that were my design, I could have sent men to do it. I came because I made a promise to your brother with his blood on my hands, and I have never in my life broken my word, and I find I am too old to begin. But a vow kept against your will is no honor. It is only another cruelty wearing honor's coat. So I will ask you, since it seems no one else has troubled to, what would you have, Delphina Grail, if the choosing were yours? She looked at him for a long moment, and he watched the fight go on behind her grave eyes. The pride that wanted to refuse him standing against the plain arithmetic of her ruin, the boarded windows, the unpaid cook, the cousin in Bath who kept his dogs better than his kin. I would have honesty, she said at last. That is all I have ever wanted and never once been given. My brother lied to me about the money until the day the men came to count the silver. My cousin writes me letters full of Christian charity and means to make a servant of me and call it love. The world has been lying to me my whole life, your grace, and dressing the lies in kindness, and I am so weary of it that I would almost rather be told a cruel truth than a soft falsehood. Her hands unfolded and folded again. So do not offer me tenderness you do not feel, or a fondness you cannot give. I have heard you are a cold man. I would sooner have your coldness spoken plainly than a warmth put on for my comfort. That would curdle inside a month. If you mean to keep your vow, keep it as it is, a bargain. A roof for a duty. I can live in a cold house. God knows I have grown used to one. She lifted her chin. But do not lie to me. Whatever else you are, be a man who does not lie to me. That is my whole price. The Duke of Kesteven, who had not been surprised by another human soul in 9 years, stood very still. He had come expecting to pity her, and found instead that she had refused his pity so completely, so cleanly, that pity had nowhere left to stand. She had asked him for the one thing he happened to possess in abundance and had thought worthless, his cold, unvarnished honesty, the very quality the drawing rooms named a defect. She wanted no warmth from him. And it was precisely because she wanted none that he felt, for the first time in longer than he could name, the smallest treacherous flicker of it, the way a man half frozen feels the pain of returning blood and mistakes it, at first, for fresh injury. Then I will give you honesty, Colvin said, and his voice was not quite steady, and he was glad the poor light hid his face. Here is the whole of it, Miss Grail, and you may weigh it as you like. I do not love you. I do not know you. A week ago I could not have told a magistrate your Christian name. I have been married once, and I made that lady no more happy than a hard winter makes a garden, and she is 9 years in the ground, and I have not sought a second wife nor wished for one. I am, as you have heard, a cold man, and the report does me no injustice. I can offer you my name, my protection, a dry roof, and my word, which is the only thing I own that has never yet been broken. I cannot offer you love, because I have none to give, and I will not insult you by pretending otherwise. That is the bargain. It is a poor one, and it is honest, and it is the best that is in me. He watched her take it in. He expected her to weep, or to accept in the small grey voice of the beaten, or perhaps even to refuse and hurl herself upon the mercy of the road out of sheer stubborn pride. She did none of these things. She studied him as though he were a sum she was working, and then, astonishingly, the firm mouth softened, not into a smile, but into something graver and warmer than a smile, and she inclined her head. That, she said, is the first honest thing a man has said to me in 3 years. I did not know how much I had missed it. She drew a breath. Very well, your grace. I accept your poor and honest bargain. A roof for a duty, and no lies between us. I will keep your house and shame your name in nothing, and I will not trouble you for a warmth you have told me you cannot give. We are agreed. She held out her hand, not to be kissed, he understood, but to be shaken, plainly the way men seal a matter between equals, and the Duke of Kesteven, who had come to Marin to discharge a debt and be rid of it, found himself crossing the cold room to take the small mended cuffed hand of an overlooked spinster in a ruined house, and found, in the half-second his fingers closed over hers, that he did not want quite so much as he ought to let it go. He released her. He told himself it was nothing, the strangeness of the day, the long drive, the ghost of Everett laughing in the dark. He told himself he would install her at Kesteven, do his honourable duty by her, and go on being the cold man the world required him to be, and that this small, clear-eyed woman who had refused his pity and asked only that he not lie to her would trouble his peace no more than any other piece of business discharged. He believed it riding home through the rain, He was wrong, and some colder, honest part of him already knew it. Knew it as surely as he knew that he would remember, for a long time, the exact grave weight of her hand, and the way she'd looked at him as though a duke were only a man after all, and not a very impressive one, and worth watching all the same. The carriage turned in at the gates of Renholt before the frost had wholly lifted from the beech avenue, and Colvin, Duke of Kesthaven, sat forward against the leather with his gloved hands folded upon the head of his cane, and did not once look out at the house he was coming to unmake. He had learned to read such houses from the drive alone, the shutter that hung a half-inch crooked, the gravel gone to weed at the edges, the single mourning wreath left too long upon the door until the ribbon gried. A house that had buried its last son and had not yet decided whether to go on living. He had come to settle a debt he owed to that son, and he intended to settle it as he settled everything, cleanly and without the smallest expenditure of himself, and then to drive away. That was the plan, and it had the merit of being simple, and he had believed in it entirely until the door was opened and he was shown into a cool drawing-room where 3 women rose to meet him, and only one of them looked as though she wished he had not come. The other 2 had prepared. He saw that at once, with the weary practised eye of a man who had spent 20 years being prepared for. The elder, a Mrs. Thackeray, whose late husband had been some sort of cousin to the dead man, wore black that was a season too new and a great deal too well cut for grief, and came toward him with both hands extended as if he were a returning heir and not a stranger arrived on business. Beside her, her daughter had arranged herself against the light of the window, so that it fell kindly on her fair hair, and made him a curtsy of such polished depth that he understood the whole of her within it. Cornelia. He knew the type before he learned the name. "Your Grace honours us beyond anything we deserve," Mrs. Thackeray said, and pressed a chair upon him as though pressing a favour, and began at once to speak of the weather and the roads and the great condescension of his visit, all in the same breathless key. While her daughter watched him from beneath her lashes with the frank, appraising patience of a woman counting a man's acres in her head, he answered as little as civility allowed. And all the while he spoke he was aware, as one is aware of a draught from a door one cannot see, of the 3rd woman, who had risen with the others and then quietly declined to be part of the tableau they had made of themselves. She stood a little back, near the cold hearth, in a grey stuff gown that had been turned at the cuffs by a careful hand, and she did not arrange herself in the light, and she did not smile at him, and she did not once try to catch his eye. This, then, would be the sister. "Miss Grayle," he said, and turned his whole attention to her, and had the small cold satisfaction of watching the mother's flow of talk stop as though a tap had been shut. "Your Grace." She inclined her head. Her voice was low and even, without eagerness and without fear, and she said nothing more, and did not fill the silence for him, and something in him that had been braced for chatter found the quiet so unexpected that he was, for a heartbeat, at a loss. "You knew who I was," he said. "You did not seem surprised." "I knew my brother had a friend of that name," she said. "He spoke of you. He said you were the only man of his acquaintance who never once asked him for anything." A pause, brief and deliberate. It is not a common epitaph for a friendship among gentlemen. I remembered it. He had not expected to be spoken of by the dead man in a girl's remembering, and he had not expected the small clean blade of it, and he found he had no ready answer. Across the room Mrs. Thackeray gave a bright anxious laugh, and said that Delphina had always been too fond of plain speaking, that it was a fault they had all tried to school out of her, that she meant nothing by it. Miss Grayle did not contradict her aunt, neither did she look sorry. She only folded her hands and waited, as one waits out weather, for the room to be handed back to those who wanted it. Colvin laid out his business as he had rehearsed it in the carriage, the debt of honour he owed her late brother, whose life had been given in a cause the Duke did not name and would not forget, the impossibility, in the present state of the family's affairs, of that debt being discharged in money, his intention, therefore, to discharge it in the only coin an unfortunate lady could not be reproached for accepting. He would marry her. He said the word marry as another man might have said convey or transfer, and he watched, without meaning to watch, to see what she would do with it. What she did was go very still. The Thackeray's did not go still. He had rather the impression of a covey of birds put up out of a hedge, Mrs. Thackeray was on her feet, words spilling out of her about the goodness of Providence and the greatness of the honor, and Cornelia had risen too. Her curtsy this time quick and shallow and her color high, and beneath the congratulations she was arranging on her face he saw the thing he could not now unsee, the swift, ugly flicker of a girl who had thought herself the object of the visit, and just discovered she was the audience. "We accept," Mrs. Thackeray was saying. "Of course we accept. That is, how happy, how truly happy." "I did not ask you, madam," Colvin said quietly, and the quiet did what shouting would not have done. She subsided. He turned again to the woman by the hearth, who had not spoken a word of acceptance and whom no one in the room had thought to consult. "I asked no one yet. I merely stated my intention. Miss Grayle has not answered me." He saw her draw a slow breath. He saw too, because he had trained himself years ago to see exactly this in ballrooms and at card tables and across the length of a bargaining table, where his own name was the stake, that she understood her position to the last farthing of it. She was a portionless woman in a house that did not want her, in a season that would not have her, with a morning that would be over before any other offer could conceivably come. He was giving her a coronet. He was giving her, more to the purpose, an escape from a charity that plainly galled her worse than any hunger. There was no answer she could give but yes, and every soul in the room knew it, and the knowing of it hung in the cold air like smoke. A meaner woman would have wept her gratitude. She did not. "May I speak to His Grace alone?" she said. It was not quite a question. Mrs. Thackeray began to protest that it was most irregular, that a young woman, that of course she herself must be present to, and Colvin cut across her by the simple expedient of rising to his feet and looking at the door, and there is a way a duke can look at a door that empties a room. In a moment the aunt and the daughter were gone into the passage, with a great rustling of injured propriety, and the door was shut, and he was alone with the sister of the man he had failed to bring home alive. For a moment neither of them spoke. He had expected, now that the audience was withdrawn, that the mask would come off and the pleading begin, or worse, the flattery, the soft turning toward him that he had come to loathe more than open greed. He had learned to distrust tenderness that arrived exactly when it was wanted. He had married himself off, once in the privacy of his own hopeful heart, to a woman whose warmth had lasted precisely as long as her doubt of his intentions, and had frozen over the very hour she was sure of him. He had been young. He had not been young again since. He waited now for Miss Grayle to be warm at him, and steeled himself to feel nothing. She did not oblige him. "You should know what you are buying," she said. The word struck the room like a dropped glass. He had used convey and discharge and intention. He had wrapped the thing in the good linen of honor. She had reached in and taken out the naked truth of it, and set it on the table between them, and she had done it in a voice entirely without bitterness, which was somehow far worse than bitterness would have been. "I did not use that word," he said. "You were kind enough not to. But it is the true one, and I would rather we began with a true word than a courteous one, because a courteous one will have to be paid for later, and I have no means to pay." She lifted her chin a fraction. "My aunt keeps me because it is cheaper than the talk it would make to turn me out, and she reminds me of the economy daily. My cousin cannot forgive me for existing in a gown she would be ashamed to give her maid. I have been these 14 months, a debt that walks about the house. You are proposing to assume the debt. I am not such a fool as to pretend it a love match, or to insult a man who knew my brother by weeping on him as though I did not know exactly what I am worth in this market and how little it is." "And what are you worth, Miss Grayle?" He asked it before he had decided to. She looked at him then, fully, for the first time, grey eyes, level, neither bold nor bashful, and he felt the look go through his guard as cleanly as if the guard had not been there at all. "To them?" she said. "The cost of my keep, less the trouble of my temper. To you? A very small, very grave motion of one shoulder. Nothing, I should think, but a way to be quit of a bad night's sleep. My brother saved your honor by dying with it, and you have not slept easy under the obligation, and you have come here to buy the mattress smooth again. That is worth doing. I do not despise you for it. But I will not thank you as though you had done it for love of me, because you have not, and if I began our acquaintance with a lie that large, I do not think I could ever afterward tell you a small true thing and be believed. He thought afterward, have been offended. He had built a life upon being a man whom no one addressed in that key, and he stood in that cold drawing room and found that he was not offended in the least, that he was, God help him, for the first time in longer than he could remember, interested. "You are very certain of my heart," he said, "for a woman who met me a quarter-hour ago. I am certain of nothing about your heart, your grace. I have only observed that you are a man who has taught himself not to have one where it can be seen, and I have some fellow feeling for the practice, because I have taught myself the same, and for the same reason, which is that it is unsafe to want things when one has no power to keep them." She said it plainly as a plain fact about them both, and the extraordinary thing, the thing that undid him, standing there, was that she said it without any triumph at having read him, as though it cost her nothing to see him clearly, and she expected no reward for it. "You need not fear that I will love you and grow tiresome. I will keep your house and honor your name, and give my aunt no fresh occasion to be ashamed of me, and ask nothing of you that you have not already offered. That is the whole of the bargain, and it is a fair one, and I accept it." She had, he realized, just agreed to marry him. She had done it in the manner of a woman signing a bond she had read to the last course and found no trap in, and she had done it with more honesty in 5 minutes than he had had from anyone in 5 years, and he discovered, to his considerable disquiet, that he did not want the interview to end. "You accept," he repeated. "I do. Did you doubt it? There was never any other answer I could give, and you knew it when you came, and I think you are too honest a man to have enjoyed knowing it." Something moved at the corner of her mouth, not a smile, but the grave near relation of one. "So we are neither of us glad, and both of us saved by it. That is a better beginning than most, I dare say." From the passage came Mrs. Thackeray's voice, pitched to be overheard, extolling the match to some servant who had not asked, and beneath it sharper, her daughter's, saying something short he could not make out and did not need to. Miss Grayle heard it too. He watched her hear it. She did not flush, and she did not glance at the door, but for the briefest instant her hands, folded so composedly before her, tightened one upon the other, and that small betrayal of the cost of her composure told him more than any weeping could have done. She was not made of stone. She had merely decided, in a house that gave her no other armor, to wear the appearance of it, and to wear it every waking hour, and never once to let them see the joints. He had never before been moved by the sight of what it cost a living creature to counterfeit stone. "Miss Grayle." He heard his own voice come out lower than he had meant it, and gentler, and he did not know where either had come from. "When my friend spoke of you, and he did speak of you more than you may know, he called you the cleverest of his family and the least valued, and he laughed when he said it, but I do not think he found it funny. I begin to see he was right on both counts." For the first time her composure faltered not toward tears, but toward something rawer and more surprised, as though he had reached past every defense she had prepared and touched the one place she had not thought to guard, which was her dead brother's good opinion. Her lips parted. She looked at him as if she were revising some settled judgment about the whole of his character, and he found he wanted, absurdly, to know what the new judgment would be. "He said that of me?" she asked, very low. "He did. I have no reason to flatter you, as you have been at some pains to remind me. I am repeating a dead man's words because they are true and because you should have them." He took up his hat and cane, because he had accomplished what he came for and had no earthly business remaining in that room. And yet he stood a moment longer than he needed to, unwilling in a way he could not have defended to any man living. "I will send my solicitor within the week. You will not be dependent upon your aunt's economy a day longer than the law requires. Whatever else this arrangement is or is not, Miss Grayle, you will not be a debt that walks about anyone's house again. You have my word on it." She did not thank him. He was beginning to understand that she would not thank him for anything she suspected he had done to ease his own conscience, and he found that he respected the refusal more than he had ever respected anyone's gratitude. She only looked at him steadily, taking his measure all over again, and then she made him a curtsy, not the deep polished sweep her cousin had performed at the window, but a small plain grave one, the curtsy of an equal acknowledging a fair dealing. "Good day, your grace." He bowed and went out past the aunt's raptures and the daughter's brittle smile, and got into his carriage, and was carried back down the beach avenue through the thin returning frost. He sat forward against the leather exactly as he had come, his hands folded on the head of his cane, and he found that this time he was not reading the crooked shutters or the greying wreath at all. He was seeing a grey gown turned at the cuffs, and a pair of level grey eyes that had looked at a duke and declined to be dazzled, and he was hearing over and over a low even voice saying you should know what you are buying, as though the words had lodged beneath the breastbone and meant to stay. He had come to settle a debt cleanly and drive away he had, but the clean part of it had somehow not been managed at all. Twice on the road he told himself, in the dry cold voice he used upon his own follies, that he had merely done a decent thing for a dead man and might now forget the door of it, and twice the telling did not take. She would be his wife within the month. What he had not known when he set out, and could not now make himself unknow, was that he was already, against every rule he had spent 20 guarded years laying down for his own protection, wondering what she would say to him next, and dreading, a little, how much he had begun to want to hear it. The great drawing-room at Kesthaven had not been so full since before the funeral, and Colvin moved through it like a man wading against a current, nodding where nodding was required, saying little, watching one point in the crowd as though it were the only fixed star in a wheeling sky. His aunt had insisted upon the evening. A house that had lost a son of its closest friend must be seen to go on living, she said, and a marriage soon to be made must be shown to the county before the county invented its own version of it. So the candles had been lit by the 100, the black crepe taken from the hall glass, and half the great families within a day's ride summoned to eat his food and study his intended and decide among themselves what she was worth. They had already decided. He heard it in the pitch of the voices, the little hush that rolled ahead of Delphina Grayle wherever she walked, the way fans came up to hide mouths that were not troubling to whisper. She wore grey silk that had been turned at the seams more than once, and a single strand of her late mother's seed pearls, and she carried herself through the appraising eyes with a straightness that Colvin found he could not stop measuring. He had expected her to shrink. Overlooked women, in his experience, learned to make themselves small, to slip along the walls of a room and hope to be forgotten. She did not slip. She stood where she was set down and let them look. Your Grace. Cornelia Thackeray arrived at his elbow in a rustle of rose-coloured satin, her gloved hand light upon his sleeve as though it had every right to rest there. She was the daughter of a marquess, and had spent 3 seasons letting it be understood that Kesthaven was hers for the asking, and she had the sort of beauty that photographs well and warms nothing. You are too generous to open your house so, and for such a cause. Her gaze slid across the room and found its target. One does admire your charity. It is not charity, Miss Thackeray. He kept his voice level. It is a promise. Of course. A promise to poor Captain Grayle. She said the name as one might name a debt one had not agreed to. How like you to honour it to the letter, though I confess I had not thought the letter required quite so much of you. A pension, perhaps. A cottage. One did not imagine it required a duchess. Her smile stayed sweet. But then you always were exact. He said nothing, which was its own kind of answer, and she took his silence for permission and moved off toward the far group where Delphina stood, and Colvin, against every instinct that had governed him for years, followed the line of her going with a coldness gathering under his ribs. He could not hear the opening of it. He saw only the shape, Cornelia and 2 of her particular friends, a Mrs. Vane and the younger Fenwick girl, closing a loose half-circle about Delphina by the pier glass, the way hounds will drift without seeming to hunt. He drifted nearer under the excuse of the punch table. Fragments reached him first. And is it true, Mrs. Vane was saying, with the bright kindness that is the cruelest thing in the world, that you kept your late brother's house yourself, with your own hands? How singular! I could not tell one end of a scrubbing brush from the other, and I am sure I never wished to learn. Then you are fortunate in your ignorance, Delphina said, as most of us are fortunate in something. But it must have been a mercy, said the Fenwick girl, to be taken up so. To go from, well, she let the word hang and gestured vaguely, as one gestures at something too small to name at all of Delphina's grey silk and turned seams an honest station. To go from that to this, Kesthaven. One hardly knows how a person bears the change, the elevation. It must quite turn the head. It has not turned mine, Delphina said. I find I am the same height I was in Michaelma's. A small laugh went round, uncertain, and Cornelia stepped into it smoothly, as into a partner's arms. You must forgive us, Miss Grayle. The forgiveness was the blade. She offered it point first. We are all so fond of the Duke, you understand, and so protective of him. We only wish to be certain he is not imposed upon. A man of his consequence attracts a great many hopes. Some of them from quarters where hope is all the fortune to be had. She let her eyes travel down the grey silk and up again, slow, so that everyone should follow where they went. It is no shame to be poor, my dear. The shame would be in pretending one is not. Or in letting a grieving man mistake his pity for something warmer, when a woman with no other prospect might find it very convenient not to correct him. The half-circle went still. Colvin's hand had closed hard upon the rim of the punch table without his willing it. He watched Delphina's face, watched for the flush, the tremor, the wet eyes that would let these women feel they had done their work well and go home satisfied. It did not come. She looked at Cornelia Thackeray with a steadiness that was almost gentle, as one looks at a child who has said something it does not understand. You are right that I am poor, Miss Thackeray, she said, and her voice was quiet, and it carried the way quiet does in a room straining to hear. I have never troubled to pretend otherwise, and I will not begin tonight in a room full of people better dressed than I am. But you are wrong in the other thing, and I think you know it, for you are not a stupid woman. I have corrected no man's heart to my advantage. I asked for nothing. I was asked. If that troubles you, the quarrel is not with me. It is with the man who did the asking, and I would not in your place take it up with him. He does not strike me as one who cares to have his promises called mistakes to his face. For a moment no one spoke. Cornelia's smile had not moved, but something behind it had, some small mechanism, and Colvin saw that she had expected tears and received instead a mirror, and did not like her own reflection in it. He should have stayed where he was. He knew even as he set down the cup that a wiser man, a colder man, the man he had trained himself these long years to be, would let her win the field she had already taken, and would not muddy it by charging in. But he was moving before the thought was finished, and he heard his own voice cut across the little silence, low and even and unmistakably the master of the house. Miss Grayle has the right of it. He came to stand at her side, and he felt the whole room's attention swing to him and settle. I did the asking, and I was not mistaken. He looked deliberately at Cornelia. I find, Miss Thackeray, that I have grown weary of hearing my own judgment discussed as though I were not in the house to defend it. Captain Grayle gave his life covering the retreat that carried me and 40 other men off the field. There is no cottage and no pension that answers such an account. What I offer his sister is not pity. It is the plain acknowledgment that I owe this family more than I can ever repay, and the small beginning of paying it. I will be obliged to any guest who remembers that under my roof it was more than he had meant to say, far more. He had passed 20 years perfecting the art of leaving rooms uncertain of his mind, of giving the world too little to fasten to, ever since a younger Colvin had opened his whole heart to a woman who had spent it like coin and left him the poorer, and here he stood, in one breath. Having laid the truth of himself out on the table for a pack of gossips to pick over, he felt the exposure of it like a draught on the back of his neck. Cornelia recovered first, as such women always do. "Why, your grace," she murmured, "how warmly you speak. I am rebuked." "I meant only kindness." She sank a small curtsy that conceded nothing and withdrew with her friends in a rose-coloured tide, and the room, released, broke into a dozen fresh conversations, all of them, he did not doubt, about the two people left standing by the pier glass. He turned to Delphina. She was looking at him with an expression he could not read, which was itself remarkable, for he read people easily and had built a life on it. "You should not have done that," she said. He had expected thanks. The absence of it steadied something in him that flattery always set jangling. "No." "No." A faint colour came into her cheeks now, where the cruelty had raised none. I had answered her. It was answered. Now every soul in this room will say the Duke leapt to shield his poor bride, because she could not shield herself, and the little I saved of my own standing you have spent for me in a sentence. She said it without heat, almost with a rueful humour, but she meant it, and he saw that she meant it. I am grateful for the intention, I am. But I did not need rescuing, your grace. I have been managing rooms like this one, without a duke to stand beside me, since I was 17. Colvin stood very still. In 20 years no one had told him he had done wrong by helping them. The world took his help as its due and thanked him and forgot him. Then I have blundered, he said slowly, and found, to his own surprise, that he was near to smiling. I am not accustomed to it. Blundering. You must forgive me a first attempt. It was a very grand blunder, she allowed, as blunders go. I have not often been defended by a man who could quiet 100 people by lowering his voice. I find I could not help it. The words came out truer than he had planned, and he let them stand. He glanced toward the long windows, where the crowd thinned into shadow and a little air moved. Will you walk to the window with me, Miss Grayle? I have had a great deal of the room tonight, and so, I think, have you. We might be permitted 5 minutes of not being looked at. She considered him a moment, actually considered, weighing the offer rather than seizing it, and that too was new to him, and then inclined her head, and they moved together toward the far end where the candlelight gave way to the blue dark beyond the glass. You knew my brother, she said when they had reached the quiet. It was not a question. Well, I think, better than you have let it be known. We served together, Portugal, and after. He looked out at the dim shapes of the park. He spoke of you, often. More often than a soldier usually speaks of his sisters, which is to say almost never, so that when Grayle did it, one attended. A muscle moved in his jaw. He said you were the only person in England who told him the truth. He said it as though it were a rare and valuable thing, and I did not properly understand him until he stopped. Until this evening, perhaps. Delphina was silent a moment. He wrote me that he had a friend who never laughed, she said. A great cold man, he called you, whom the whole regiment feared and whom he trusted with his life. I thought he exaggerated, for Aldous exaggerated everything. I see he did not. You think me a great cold man? I think, she said carefully, turning the pearls at her throat, that you have arranged for people to think it, and that it costs you something to keep the arrangement, and that just now, for about the length of one sentence, you forgot to. She looked up at him. I did not mean it as a flattery. I do not flatter. I have watched it done all my life, and it always seemed to me a way of lying while smiling, and I would rather do neither. He looked down at her, at the plain grey silk, the turned seams. The steady grey eyes that had faced down Cornelia Thackeray without a tremor, and now faced him without the smallest wish to please, and Colvin, Duke of Kesthaven, who had ordered his whole existence around the discipline of wanting nothing he could not command, felt the ground of that discipline shift quietly beneath him. Then do neither with me, he said, low. God knows I am surrounded by the other thing. It is like living in a house of mirrors, Miss Grayle. Everywhere I turn, some agreeable reflection of what I am supposed to wish to hear. I had begun to think there was no honest voice left within 100 miles of my name. He paused. And then my dearest friend contrives to die and leave me his sister, and she stands in my drawing room and tells me I have blundered. Something eased at the corner of her mouth, not quite a smile, the promise of one. It seemed the honest voice you were missing, she said. I could not in conscience keep it to myself. He laughed. It surprised them both. It was not a sound he made often, and it came rough, out of practice, and she looked up at it with a startled brightness, as though she had struck water from a stone. Across the room he was distantly aware of heads turning, of the ripple that the Duke of Kesthaven's laughter sent through a gathering unused to hearing it, and for once he did not care what the county made of him. You must tell me the rest, he said, what he wrote of me. All of it, the unflattering parts especially. I begin to think I have not had a true accounting of myself in 20 years, and you appear to be the one creditor honest enough to render it. He said once that you had refused 3 offers of marriage, Colvin went on, each of them, by the measure of the world, a rescue from your circumstances, and each of them refused. He could not comprehend it. He thought you the cleverest woman he knew, and the most determined to remain poor. He watched her. I have wondered about it since I came to the church and asked your hand of a family that had none of it left to spare. Why refuse them? Because they wished to marry my situation and not myself, she said simply. A woman with nothing is an easy thing to be generous to. It flatters a man to lift her, but I have never wanted lifting, your grace. I have wanted only to be seen plainly as I am, and valued for what I am, and not for the pleasant sensation of stooping. 3 men offered me a roof and a rank and the great warm glow of their own charity. Not one of them ever asked me a question and waited for the answer. She turned the pearls again. You asked me one a moment ago, and you have waited. That is more than the 3 of them managed between them. The observation landed somewhere under his breastbone, quite an exact, and he had no ready guard against it, for it was aimed neither to wound nor to please, and so slipped past every defense he owned. And this offer, he said before he had decided to, mine. It lifts you higher than any of the 3, and comes from a family with nothing left to bargain. By your own account it ought to be the worst of the lot. He met her eyes. Do you take it for the roof, Miss Grayle, or for the stooping? I should like the honest accounting of that as well. She did not answer at once. She looked at him a long moment, grave, and he found he was holding his breath like a boy. I have not decided what I take it for, she said at last. I know only that you asked me a true thing and did not dress it up, and that tonight you have not once made me feel that you were being kind to me. That is a beginning. I will tell you the rest when I know it, and I will tell you truly, whichever way it falls. It is a great deal more than I am accustomed to being promised. His voice had gone quieter than he intended. Most people offer me everything and mean none of it. You offer me almost nothing and I believe every word. I begin to see what your brother meant, Miss Grayle. It would take longer than 5 minutes to say it all. Then we shall be missed. He said it easily, and only heard the meaning under it after it was out, that he was proposing plainly to be missed from his own party for the sake of standing at a dark window with an overlooked woman in a made-over gown. The knowledge ought to have alarmed him. It did alarm him, and still he did not move, and still, absurdly, he wanted nothing in the world so much as to hear the next thing she would say. She was looking out at the dark park now, and he was looking at her, and the noise of the great bright room had fallen away to something small and far off, and Colvin understood, with the particular dismay of a man who has spent his life avoiding exactly this, that 5 minutes would not be nearly enough. That he could stand here until the candles guttered and the last carriage was called, and count it the best hour he had passed in years, and be sorry only that it must end. He did not sleep that night, and he was not fool enough to pretend the fault lay with the house. Kesthaven had known worse quiet than this. The great grey pile had swallowed grief before and given nothing back. No, the thing that kept him at his window until the candles guttered was the memory of a plain woman in a borrowed gown, saying to him across the empty drawing-room, without flattery and without fear, that she had never once believed him the monster the county made of him. He had wanted to ask her why. He had wanted to keep her there and go on asking her things until dawn, which was a wanting so foreign to him that he distrusted it as he would distrust a stranger at the gate. By morning the distrust had not saved him. He found himself walking the long gallery at an hour when no one walked it, and telling himself it was for the air, and knowing it was not, he came upon her in the library. She had not heard the door, and for a moment Colvin held himself in the shadow of the shelves and simply watched her, as a man watches something he has no right to and cannot look away from all the same. Delphina Grayle stood at the tall south window with a book she was not reading, her thumb keeping a place she had plainly abandoned, her whole attention given to the grounds beyond the glass. The morning light was unkind, or should have been. It found the mended seam at her shoulder, the plainness of her dress, the shadows beneath her eyes that spoke of her own sleepless hours. It found, too, the line of her throat and the steadiness of her, and Colvin discovered that he did not think her plain at all, and had not for some days, and had been lying to himself about that as well. "You may come in, your grace," she said without turning. "I heard the door. I only hoped, if I did not look, you might change your mind and go, and spare us both the awkwardness. That is a poor opinion of my company." "It is a fair opinion of my own." Now she turned, and there was that in her face he had not expected, not the practised deference of the drawing-room, but something rueful and honest and tired. "I am not accustomed to being sought, your grace. I keep waiting to learn what is wanted of me. It makes me poor conversation until I have puzzled it out. The frankness of it struck him like cold water. He crossed the room slowly and set his hand upon the back of a chair and did not sit. "And have you puzzled it out?" "Not in the least." She almost smiled. "You are a difficult sum, Your Grace. Everyone else in this house wants a thing of me they will not name, and I have grown clever at reading them. You I cannot read at all, and it unsettles me more than their cruelty does. What do the others want of you?" She looked at him a long moment, weighing, he thought, how much truth a duke would tolerate before breakfast. Then she set the book upon the sill. "They want me grateful," she said. "They want me to understand what a great condescension has been done me, and to be seen understanding it, so that when I fail, and they mean me to fail, no one may say I was not given every chance. Mrs. Thackeray is very fond of chances. She hands them out as one hands sweets to a child one intends to slap." Colvin said nothing. He was thinking of Cornelia Thackeray's smooth voice the night before, the way she had let the word charity fall so lightly, so that it might be either kindness or a knife depending on how it landed. "You needn't look so grave," Delphina went on. "I am telling you this not to complain of it. I have no complaint. I know precisely what I am, Your Grace, and I have known it a great while." She said it without a scrap of self-pity, as a woman states the weather. "When my brother lived, I kept his house at Ludworth. There was little money and less society, and I did the accounts and nursed him through the winters and read to him when his eyes failed, and I was content, or near enough to content that I did not trouble the distinction. He was the only creature living who looked at me and saw a person rather than a burden or a use." Her voice did not break, but it changed, and Colvin felt the change go through him. "When he died, I discovered I was a debt that had come due. There was no place for a spinster sister with no portion. So I was arranged, passed to a cousin, then to Mrs. Thackeray's keeping, then, when your offer came, forwarded to you like a parcel that has at last found its direction. I do not tell you this for sympathy. I tell you so you will not imagine I mistake my situation. I know I was not chosen. I was owed." Something in Colvin's chest turned over, slow and painful, like a key long unused forced in a lock. He had made the offer out of duty. He had said as much to his own steward without shame. Harry Grail had pulled him half-drowned from the flood at Ledbrook 19 years gone, when they were boys who did not yet know death could touch them, and Harry Grail had died a poor man with an unprovided sister, and a debt was a debt. Colvin had told himself the marriage was payment. He had told himself he felt nothing and would go on feeling nothing, because feeling was a country he had been driven out of long ago, and did not mean to be fool enough to enter twice. "You were owed," he said, and his voice came rougher than he intended. "That is how I named it to myself as well. A debt to your brother. I will not insult you by pretending otherwise. You would see through it in an instant, and I find I would rather not be seen through by you today." He drew a breath. "But I begin to think I named the thing wrongly." "Do not." The word came quick, almost sharp, and it stopped him. Her hands had closed upon the sill behind her. "Please do not say kind things to me, Your Grace, unless you mean them to the bone. I have been given a great many kindnesses that were only cruelty dressed for church. I would sooner you were plainly cold. Coldness I know how to bear. It is hope I cannot afford." For the length of several heartbeats, neither of them spoke. Somewhere below a door closed and a servant's feet crossed a flagged floor and were gone. The house went back to its listening quiet. And Colvin, who had built 19 years of careful walls precisely, so that no woman might ever again reach past his rank to the man behind it, looked at Delphina Grail standing braced against a windowsill as though against a coming blow, and felt the whole edifice of himself shift on its foundation. "Come," he said abruptly, "walk with me. The rain has stopped and I have had my fill of these four walls." She hesitated. "It is not proper, Your Grace, for us to. We are to be married in a fortnight," he said. "I think we may be permitted to walk in my own garden without the parish taking arms, unless you fear me after all." "I have never feared you," she said, and there was the ghost of that dry warmth again, which I begin to see was very careless of me. The lower garden lay drowned in the smell of wet box and turned earth, the gravel dark, the yews black with rain. She walked a careful arm's length from him at first, her hands folded, her chin level, a woman conducting herself correctly through hostile country. Colvin found he did not want correctness. He slowed his stride to hers and asked her, because he genuinely wished to know, which surprised him, what she had read to her brother in those failing winters, and she told him, and the arm's length between them narrowed without either of them appearing to intend it. She spoke of books as one speaks of friends. She had a low, unhurried voice and a way of turning a phrase that made him wish to answer well, to be worth answering. When he said something dry, she did not laugh to please him. She laughed because it had struck her. A real startled sound quickly recovered, and he found himself appallingly angling for it, saying the next thing and the next to hear it come again. He could not remember the last time he had wished to make anyone laugh. He had forgotten he had ever been a man who wished it. "You are not as they told me," she said at last, when they had come to the stone balustrade above the sunk garden and stopped there without deciding to. In the servants' hall at Mrs. Thackeray's they said the Duke of Kesthaven had a heart like the Ledbrook winters, that he had loved once and been made a fool of, and had sworn off the whole business of feeling as another man swears off drink. Colvin's hand tightened on the wet stone. "The servants' hall is better informed than I should like. Then it is true. She did not ask it unkindly. She asked it the way she seemed to ask everything, as though the truth were simply owed between them, and neither of them could afford the coin of pretending. It is true enough." He looked out over the dripping yews and found it was, to his own astonishment, no great labour to say it to her, where he had said it to no living soul in 19 years. "There was a lady, when I was young and had lately come into the title. She was charming, and I was flattered, and I believed she cared for me. I learned in time that she cared for the coronet, and for the houses, and for the settlements, and that the man who came attached to them was to her an inconvenience she meant to endure with grace once the register was signed. I heard her say as much to a friend in a room she thought empty. She named the sum I was worth and laughed at how little else there was to me." He heard the old flatness come into his voice, the tone he used to make the thing bearable. "I did not marry her. I have not much wished to marry anyone since. It is a simpler life, Miss Grayle, to be wanted for one's rents. One is never disappointed." "And never warm," she said softly. "And never warm," he agreed. "I had made my peace with that. I thought it a fair bargain. Until—" He turned and looked at her, and did not answer with words. He had not meant to look at her so. But she was standing very close now, closer than the length of a proper arm, the rain-light silver on her face and her grey eyes wide and steady on his, and he saw her understand what he had not said. He saw the breath go out of her. He lifted his hand, slowly as a man moves near a thing he fears to startle, and with the backs of his fingers he brushed a loosened strand of dark hair from her cheek, where the wind had pressed it. His knuckles grazed her skin. She did not draw back. She went very still, the way the whole house went still, and her lips parted upon a word she did not say, and for one long ungoverned moment Colvin, Duke of Kesthaven, forgot every wall he had ever built and stood on the edge of them all with his heart naked in the cold air. Then she stepped back. Only a half step, but it was enough, and she pressed her folded hands hard against her waist as though to hold something in. "You must not," she whispered, and her voice was not steady now, not at all. "You must not make me hope, your grace, for I have just told you I cannot afford it, and you did not listen. If you are kind to me, and then this marriage becomes what such marriages become, a cold civility, a duke and his charity in separate wings, I will bear it. I have borne worse. But I will not bear it as well if I have once let myself believe you meant it. Do you see? You may break a plain woman easily. There is so little of me that has not already been spent. There is nothing plain in you," he said low, and the words were out before he could weigh them. "I have looked for it, Delphina. God help me, I came into this marriage counting on it, on a plain, grateful, forgettable woman I might house and provide for and never think of, and so keep my peace. I have not been able to find her. She does not exist. There is only you who will not flatter me and will not fear me, and will not let me lie to myself for the length of a single morning. And I do not know what to do with you, and I have not slept." She stared at him. Whatever she had braced herself to hear, it had not been that. "That was not fair of me," he said quieter. "You asked me to be plainly cold. I find I cannot manage it. That is the whole of my defence, and it is a poor one." Her eyes had filled, though no tear fell. She was too proud or too careful, and he loved her the more for the pride of it and cursed himself for the word love rising unbidden in him like water through a broken hull. She mastered herself. When she spoke again, her voice had steadied into something that cost her visibly. "Then let us be careful," she said. "Both of us. Let us not say more than we can stand behind when the house is full again and the world is looking. There are those under this very roof who would give a great deal to see either of us made a fool. I have watched Mrs. Thackeray a long while, Your Grace. She did not forward me to you out of charity. She has some purpose in it I have not yet unravelled, and until I have, I would not have her see anything in your face worth the using." The warning cooled him as nothing else could have. She was right, and the rightness of it, that she should think of his safety, guard his exposed heart, even while asking him to spare hers, undid him more thoroughly than any tenderness. He had spent 19 years certain that to be known was to be endangered. Here stood a woman who had known him for the space of one wet morning, seen straight to the wound of him, and moved at once to stand between it and the world. "You are afraid of her," he said. "I am wary of her. That is a different and more useful thing." She glanced back toward the house, toward the tall windows where any watcher might stand, and drew the shreds of her composure about her like a shawl. "She smiled too much last night, after you spoke for me before the others. A woman like Mrs. Thackeray does not smile when she is thwarted. She smiles when she has thought of something. I should feel easier if I knew what." Colvin followed her gaze to the grey face of Kesthaven, its windows blank and bright with rain light, and for the first time the great house looked to him less like a fortress than a place where things might be planned in rooms he did not enter. He thought of Cornelia Thackeray's soft laugh. He thought of how quickly she had yielded the field the night before, and how little such women ever truly yielded. "Whatever she intends," he said, "she will find I am not the man she reckoned on." "No," Delphina said, and something moved behind her steady eyes that was almost, but not yet, hope. "I begin to think she has miscalculated us both." She drew a breath and stepped fully back into propriety, hands folded, chin level, the careful woman once more. But the careful woman looked at him now as she had not that morning, as though a door in her had come unlatched and could not quite be shut again. "I must go in, Your Grace, before we are missed, and give her more to smile about." She went, her plain dress dark with the wet grass, and did not look back, which he understood was its own kind of courage. Colvin stood a long while at the balustrade after she had gone, his fingers still remembering the warmth of her cheek, his careful, ruined piece lying in pieces at his feet, and knew, with the cold certainty of a man watching a storm come up the valley, that whatever Cornelia Thackeray was smiling about, it was coming for the only thing he had left himself to lose. The change came as ruin so often does, dressed in the colours of an ordinary morning. Colvin rose before the household stirred, as had lately become his habit. Only because the hour before breakfast was the hour he might contrive to find Delphine alone in the East Gallery, where the light came in long and gold across the portraits of men who had never once, in all their painted centuries, looked as content as he had begun to feel. He had grown greedy for those quarter hours, who had spent a decade schooling himself to want nothing he could not command, now measured his days by the sound of her step on the gallery boards and the particular way she said his name, without title, as though the man alone were sufficient. It was a dangerous softening, and he knew it, and for once in his guarded life he had chosen not to guard against it. She was not in the gallery. That was the first small wrongness, no larger than a draught under a door. He waited past the striking of the clock, then past its quarter, and told himself she had been kept by some duty of the morning household, some errand of her own kindness. But when he went down at last, it was to find the morning room already occupied, and every face in it turned toward him with the awful, avid stillness of people who have been waiting for an audience. Cornelia Thackeray sat at the centre of it like a jewel in a setting made to display her. She had dressed with care, he noted distantly, in the greys that mourning permitted, greys chosen to flatter rather than to grieve, and her hands were folded upon a small writing case in her lap as though upon a prayer book. Ranged about her were the several cousins and connections who had descended upon the house in the weeks since the funeral, ostensibly to comfort, in truth to appraise, and to divide among themselves whatever a dead man's estate and a distracted duke might carelessly let fall. Kesthaven, Cornelia said, and rose, and there was sorrow in her voice, beautifully counterfeited. "I had hoped to spare you this. Truly I had. I have sat awake the whole night asking myself whether silence were not the kinder course, but I find I cannot love you and let you be deceived. It would be no friendship at all. You will say plainly what you mean, he answered, or you will not detain me. He heard the coldness in his own voice and was glad of it. It was the old armor, worn smooth by long use, and it settled over him now with a familiarity that ought to have shamed him. He had put it off, this last month, more than he had put it off in years. He had not understood until this instant how much he had come to rely on being without it. Cornelia opened the writing case. Then plainly she said, "This came into my possession yesterday. I will not tell you by what means. Suffice that it was not sought, only that once seen it could not be unseen." She drew out a folded paper, its seal already broken, and held it toward him across the room as one might hold out something that had died. "It is in her hand. Compare it, I beg you, with any note she has ever written you. I would to God it were otherwise." He did not take it at once. He looked at her instead, and then at the ring of watching faces, and something very old and very cold woke in the pit of him and stretched. He had been deceived once before. That was the wound he never spoke of, the reason men called him hard and were not entirely wrong. Years gone, before the title had come to him and made him a prize, there had been a woman he had loved with the whole undefended heart of a younger man, and she had let him love her, and had smiled and blushed and said the sweet expected things, and all the while she had been weighing him against a richer suitor as a merchant weighs coin. He had learned of it by a letter, exactly such a letter, in exactly such a hand, addressed not to him but to a confederate, mocking the very tenderness he had believed was his alone. He had not wept. He had simply closed a door inside himself and thrown the bolt, and for 10 years no one had come near enough to trouble it. He had told himself he was the safer for it. He had told himself a great many things. Now his hand went out, steady, and took the paper. The writing was hers. He knew it before he read a word, knew the particular slope of her letters, the small economical hand of a woman who had never had paper to waste. That knowledge went into him like a blade slid between the ribs, so clean he scarcely felt it enter. He read. The words swam and then held still. It was addressed to no one he knew, a Christian name only, some man. It spoke of the Duke of Kesthaven in terms a stranger might have used of a horse at market. It spoke of patience, of a part well played, of grief usefully worn. It said that the brother's death, tragic as it was, had opened a door no honest scheming could have opened, and that a clever woman did not close such doors from delicacy. It said that once the settlements were signed and the things safe, there would be means enough and time enough, and freedom enough for those who had waited. It was signed with her name. Colvin read it twice. He was aware of the room breathing around him, of Cornelia's lovely downcast face, of the cousins leaning in like grasses before a wind. He was aware, above all, of the cold thing in his chest opening its arms wide, saying, you see, you knew, you always knew. There is no tenderness in the world that is not a snare, and you were a fool to lay down your guard, and here is your proof, and now you may be safe again, safe and cold and untouched forever. For a moment, he would despise himself for it afterward, would carry the shame of it long after the rest was mended. For one terrible moment he believed it. Not because the letter was persuasive, though it was, but because believing it cost him nothing he had not already trained himself to pay, and disbelieving it required him to stand once more in the open with his heart bared and trust that this time the blow would not come. He had done that once. He did not know if he had it in him to do it twice. "Where is she?" he said. His voice came out low and strange. "I sent for her," Cornelia murmured. "She is coming." "I thought it only just that she should have the chance to answer, though I confess I do not see what answer there could be." She let a small silence fall, and then gently the knife turned. "There is more, Kesthaven. I would not have you learn it piecemeal. The pearls, your mother's pearls, that you gave into her keeping, the housekeeper cannot find them. She has been 3 days looking. I did not wish to think what I now help but think. The pearls. He had given them to Delphina himself, a fortnight since, in the gallery, in the gold light, closing the clasp at the back of her neck with his own unsteady hands while she stood very still, and did not thank him with words because her eyes had thanked him past the power of any word. He remembered the warmth of her nape under his fingers. He remembered thinking, with the reckless clarity of a man falling, that he would give her every jewel his house possessed, and count them well spent to see her look at him so. And now the cold voice said, and she has taken them, and will run, and you gave them to her yourself, you signed your own folly with your own hand, exactly as you did before. The door opened. Delphina came in as she always came, without hurry and without art, her plain grey gown and her steady grey eyes, and she checked upon the threshold at the sight of them all assembled, at the paper still open in his hand, at his face. He watched her understand. He watched it move across her features, not fear first but sorrow, a sorrow that seemed, impossibly, to be for him rather than for herself. Then she came the rest of the way into the room and stood, and folded her hands, and waited to be accused as a prisoner waits at the bar, with a dignity that made every other person in that room, for all their finery, look suddenly small and grubby and unclean. "You are shown a letter," she said, looking at it, not at them. "In my hand, I think, or made to seem so, and I am charged with something shameful in it." "You do not ask what," Cornelia said softly. "How curious." "I do not ask because I can see the answer written in his face," Delphina replied, and now she did look at Colvin full and level and without one particle of pleading, "and I find I would rather read it there than hear it from you." "Then read it," Cornelia said, and could not quite keep the triumph from beneath the grief. "Read what your Duke has learned of you, that your tears were a performance, that your poverty was a lure and your brother's grave a convenience, that you married a great house for its coffers and its pearls, and mocked the master of it to your lover behind your hand. It is all here in your own writing, my dear, if you can." The room waited. Colvin waited, though he could not have said, in that moment, for what.